She collapsed in a law office hallway, hungry, pregnant, and utterly alone. He watched it happen, holding his breath. Because 12 years ago, his wife died carrying their child. Claire Bennett was just a temp, a single mom barely holding it together. When her body gave out, she thought she'd lose everything, including the job that barely kept her son alive. But Ethan Green saw something that day. Not just a struggling employee, but the echo of a pain he knew too well. 2 lives, one trying to survive the present, one haunted by the past. And in the quiet moments that followed, they would learn that sometimes. Healing begins, not with a rescue, but with someone who stays. Now imagine, what would you do if life offered you a second chance, wrapped in someone else's brokenness? This isn't a love story. It's a story of trust, of dignity, of building something sacred from the ruins. If this moves you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Here, your heart has a place. Let's begin. She hadn't eaten since noon the day before, but Claire couldn't stop, not with her son's medicine running out, and her paycheck already spent. The office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fresh toner. Fluorescent lights buzzed quietly overhead, casting a pale, sterile glow across the long stretch of cubicles on the 19th floor of Green and McAllister. Outside the wide windows, snowflakes drifted down with lazy persistence, softening the sharp edges of downtown Minneapolis. Claire Bennett moved quickly between file cabinets, clutching a manila folder marked Client Settlement McKinley. Her brown boots, salt-stained and worn at the soles, made no sound on the low office carpet. A navy cardigan, one size too big, clung to her narrow shoulders, hiding the way her ribs pressed too closely to her skin. She glanced at the clock, 11:47 a.m. If she worked fast, she might get time to warm up a tea bag she'd smuggled from home. Not that it mattered. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago. Hunger had become a dull companion lately, something she carried quietly, like the rest of her burdens. Claire's desk was tucked in a corner, near the copy machines. Temporary placement, she reminded herself. 3 more weeks until the temp contract ended, unless they let her go sooner. She couldn't afford that, not now, not when Josh's autoimmune flare-up was getting worse. His last round of medication had cost nearly $300, and the school nurse had called just yesterday to say he was unusually tired again. There was no overtime, no benefits, and no promises in this job. But it was a job. And for Claire Bennett, 35, mother of 1, it was enough for now. She bent down to retrieve a dropped paperclip when the world tilted sideways. At first, it was just a wave of dizziness, like standing too quickly after kneeling. Then the edges of her vision blurred. She steadied herself against the desk, blinking hard. Her heart thudded in her ears. Too loud, too fast. A ringing sound rose somewhere between her temples. The room swayed, and then nothing. A thud echoed softly as her body hit the carpet. Maggie, a paralegal in her early 40s who'd worked next to Claire for a month, gasped audibly. "Claire, Claire." Her voice rose an octave, high and tight with panic. Footsteps clattered from down the hall as chairs scraped and heads turned. Within seconds, a small crowd had gathered, hesitant but concerned. Someone called the front desk. Another dialed 911. The air buzzed with confusion. "Is she breathing? I think so." She was pale all morning. Somebody get her ID. Her handbag, worn and scuffed, had slipped from her shoulder when she fell. Its contents had spilled across the floor pens. A small notepad, a cracked compact mirror, a box of tissues, and a pale blue wallet. And something else. A small plastic stick lay among the clutter. At first glance, it looked like a thermometer. Maggie leaned down, reached for it, then froze. Her breath caught, 2 pink lines, bold, unmistakable. Before she could move, a deep voice cut through the murmurs. What happened here? Ethan Green had arrived, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair flecked with gray at the temples. Ethan moved through the circle of employees with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. He wore a charcoal suit, fitted and sharp, and a long black coat flapped lightly behind him as he walked. He wasn't supposed to be on the 19th floor. His office occupied the top of the building floor, 32, with a view of the entire city and a private elevator that shielded him from the day-to-day bustle of his employees. But a meeting had ended early, and he had chosen, for reasons he couldn't quite name, to walk the stairs down instead of taking the elevator. Now he stood over the collapsed woman, frowning as paramedics pushed their way in. Maggie, flustered, backed up quickly, dropping the object in her hand. It landed near Ethan's shoe. He looked down. Silence filled the hallway. Ethan bent, slowly, and picked it up. He turned it over in his palm. The quiet ticking of his watch, the only sound he could hear. The test was simple, cheap, even, but definitive. Two bold pink lines stared up at him, steady and cruel. Someone cleared their throat. "She's a temp. Name's Claire Bennett, I think." No emergency contact listed on file. The paramedics moved quickly, checking vitals, preparing the stretcher. Claire lay motionless, one arm tucked awkwardly beneath her face pale against the carpet. A faint crease of worry sat between her brows, as if, even unconscious, she couldn't let herself rest. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at her. Really looked. He didn't know her story. Didn't know where she lived, or what brought her to work every morning in a coat far too thin for a Minnesota winter. But somehow, this moment, it stirred something. He slipped the test into the side pocket of her bag, zipping it gently closed. "Let me know which hospital they're taking her to," he said to no one in particular, already turning toward the elevator. As the stretcher wheeled Claire toward the waiting ambulance, Ethan stood alone in the hallway. Snow swirled behind the tall windows. The fluorescent lights hummed on, and the silence she left behind felt heavier than it should have. Ethan Green hadn't seen a pregnancy test in over a decade, not since his wife's last one, just weeks before she passed. That memory, like most involving Elena, came to him not as a sharp image, but as a feeling. A room with sunlight streaming across hardwood floors, her laughter echoing through a Sunday morning, the way she'd whispered, "We're going to be parents," as if speaking it aloud might scare the joy away. That joy hadn't lasted long. Now, standing in the hospital corridor with Winter clinging to his overcoat, Ethan's hand tightened imperceptibly around the plastic stick in his pocket. He hadn't meant to keep it. He should have left it in her bag, forgotten it like 100 other things that weren't his concern. But he hadn't. It was still there, resting inside the lining of his coat like a question he didn't know how to answer. The nurse at the ER front desk glanced up. "You said you're the employer." "Yes," Ethan replied. She collapsed at work. "I called it in." The nurse nodded, expression professional. "We'll let you know once she's stabilized. You can have a seat." Ethan didn't sit. Instead, he moved to the window at the end of the hallway. Snow had turned to sleet, streaking down the glass in jagged lines. Minneapolis looked gray and tired beneath the sky. He was still wearing his suit, still had a meeting scheduled at 2:00, still had contracts waiting for signature and emails he hadn't opened. But none of it felt urgent right now. He closed his eyes. 6 years. That's how long it had been since the funeral, since he buried the woman who had been the only part of his life untouched by ambition. Elena had been soft where he was sharp, warm where he was composed. She'd worked in social services, low pay, long hours, relentless hope, the kind of person who always remembered birthdays, even for the janitor. When she found out she was pregnant, they'd been married just over a year. She hadn't even had time to schedule her first prenatal appointment before the diagnosis came. Acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive, fast. She died within months. And with her went the only child they ever would have. Ethan had thrown himself into work afterward, built the firm, expanded it, doubled the client base, moved into the penthouse apartment, wrote checks to children's charities, endowments, hospitals. He had not set foot in a maternity ward until now. The nurse called his name softly. Mr. Green. "You can see her now." He followed her down a quiet hallway into a small, curtained-off space. Claire lay on a narrow hospital bed, IV in her arm, her skin nearly translucent under the overhead light. She looked even younger like this, or perhaps just more fragile. The monitor beeped steadily beside her, rhythmic and calm. Ethan stood at the foot of the bed, unsure why he was even here. She was an employee, a temp, at that. He barely knew her last name before this morning, and yet there had been something in the way she collapsed. Not dramatic, not attention-seeking, just quiet surrender, like her body had finally given up a fight she never asked to be part of. A knock at the open door pulled him from his thoughts. A doctor in blue scrubs stepped in, clipboard in hand. Mr. Green. Yes, I'm Dr. Phillips. You brought Miss Bennett in. I did. She fainted at the office. Doctor. Phillips nodded. She's stable now. Labs show mild dehydration, low blood sugar, and signs of malnutrition. Has she mentioned any medical conditions? Ethan shook his head. Not to me. We're not close. The doctor hesitated, then lowered his voice. We've also detected elevated hormone levels, HCG. It's too early to confirm, but it's consistent with early pregnancy. Ethan's gaze flickered toward Claire. Her eyes were closed, lashes dark against her cheeks. She hadn't moved. She hasn't said anything about that either, he said, quieter now. Well, we'll know more once she wakes up. Doctor, Phillips said, I've left instructions with the nurse. She should stay overnight for observation. He left, and silence reclaimed the room. Ethan pulled the chair beside the bed, sat slowly. He rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. For a long time, he just watched her breathe. Her bag sat near the wall, half zipped. A paperback novel peeked out to kill a mockingbird. A receipt from the grocery store poked out from the pages as a makeshift bookmark. Milk, cereal, children's chewable vitamins. So, she had a child already. And now, maybe another on the way. He thought of Elena again, of the baby they'd never met. The quiet ache that had never fully left. He had no right to interfere in this woman's life. She hadn't asked for his help. She didn't even know he'd followed the ambulance, let alone sat here now like some silent guardian. But something about her stirred an old instinct, one he'd buried under board meetings and quarterly reports. Ethan leaned back slightly, eyes drifting to the floor. Then slowly, as if pulled by a thought he hadn't yet formed, he slipped his hand into his coat pocket. The pregnancy test was still there. Smooth plastic. Faint warmth from his own body heat. 2 pink lines. He didn't know her story, but for the first time in years, he wanted to. Behind every quiet woman is a storm no one sees. Claire woke to the low hum of fluorescent lighting and the distant shuffle of hospital feet. The ceiling above her was white, cracked slightly in the corner and unfamiliar. She blinked once, then again, trying to place herself. Then it hit her work. The file room, the dizziness. She sat up too quickly, head spinning. A nurse appeared beside her almost instantly. Easy, the nurse said kindly, placing a steadying hand on her arm. You fainted. You've been out for a few hours. Claire's first words came out as a whisper. What time is it? Almost 5, the nurse replied. You're at Fairview Medical. You collapsed at your office. Someone called 911. Claire's pulse thudded in her ears. My job, she breathed, gripping the edge of the blanket. Did I get fired? The nurse shook her head. There was a man with you when you came in. Said he was your boss. He's already spoken to the front desk. Told us to call if you needed anything. Claire closed her eyes. Ethan Green. Of all the people to see her like that. She barely knew the man, only that he rarely smiled and that his suits probably cost more than her rent. He'd seen her collapse. Maybe more. She thought of her bag had anyone opened it. Her eyes scanned the room. There it was, slumped quietly in the corner chair, zipper slightly ajar. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd tucked a pregnancy test in there 2 days ago, meaning to throw it out. Had anyone seen it? A quiet knock at the door interrupted her spiral. She didn't need to look. She knew. Ethan Green stepped inside, just a half step over the threshold. He didn't wear his coat anymore. His sleeves were rolled up, dress shirt creased at the elbows. Somehow, the informal look made him more human, less untouchable. "You're awake," he said simply. Claire's throat was dry. "Yes. I thank you. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't?" he replied. "The doctor said it was likely exhaustion and dehydration. They'll keep you overnight, just in case." She nodded, looking down at her lap. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I skipped lunch. Again." His voice was quiet. "It's more than that, isn't it?" She hesitated. "I have a son, Josh. He's 9, has a rare autoimmune disorder. Medication's expensive. I don't have benefits or a cushion, so sometimes I choose food for him instead of me." There was a pause. "Thank you for not firing me," she added, eyes still lowered. "I'm not firing you," Ethan said gently. "But Claire, you have to take care of yourself, too." She looked up then, surprised at the softness in his voice. But before she could say more, he nodded toward the hallway. "I'll let the nurse know you're awake." Then he was gone. Just like that. Claire leaned back into the pillow. Overwhelmed, she wouldn't sleep. She never slept well in strange places, but she closed her eyes and stayed still because stillness, for now, felt safer than trying to make sense of anything else. The next morning, the cab dropped her in front of their duplex in the northeast corner of the city. The snow had turned to slush overnight, and the front steps were slick with a mix of ice and melting gravel. Inside, the heat greeted her in weak, uneven bursts. Mom Josh's voice came from the couch, followed by the thump of socked feet running across the worn carpet. Claire knelt, opening her arms just in time to catch him. His skinny frame curled into hers. She breathed him in peanut butter, fabric softener, and something only mothers can name. "Where were you?" he asked, voice small. "Maggie picked me up from school." "I'm okay," Claire whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Just a little tired. I'm home now." Josh didn't ask more. He never did. At 9, he already understood too much about things a child shouldn't have to. She made him a grilled cheese sandwich, cutting it diagonally the way he liked. He settled in to watch cartoons while she sat at the small dining table with the bills. Electric, rent, Josh's medication, refill notice. Claire rested her forehead in her hand. She'd thought things were tight before. Now they were stretched to breaking. Later that night, after Josh had fallen asleep, curled under the same fleece blanket he'd had since he was 3, Claire stood in the doorway of her tiny bedroom. She opened the second drawer of her nightstand. Inside was a plastic grocery bag, and inside that, a test. A different one. Not the one from her work bag. This one, she'd bought herself. Taken in the early morning hours, 2 days before she collapsed. Positive. 2 faint lines. No denying it. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at it for a long time. Then, carefully, she wrapped it back up and tucked it beneath a stack of old envelopes. In the darkness, Claire crept back into Josh's room. She sat on the floor beside his bed, knees pulled to her chest. His breathing was slow and steady, one hand curled beneath his cheek. His body, though frail, radiated the quiet warmth of trust. She reached out and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "I don't know how I'm going to do this," she whispered. Her voice didn't shake. It was too tired to shake. She leaned her head against the edge of the bed frame, closed her eyes, and let the silence answer. Then, after a long pause, she whispered again. "Just hold on, baby. Mommy will figure it out. Sometimes help comes from the last person you expect." Claire smoothed the creases on her skirt for the 3rd time in the elevator. Her blouse was still slightly damp from where she'd scrubbed out a stain that morning. The babysitter had canceled again, so she'd drop Josh at Maggie's on the way in, whispering promises that she'd be back by dinner. It was her first day back after the hospital. The receptionist had handed her a small envelope upon arrival, simple, unmarked. Inside was a folded note in careful handwriting. Please come to the 32nd floor at 10 B. E. G. Just initials, as if there were any doubt who it was from. Now. The elevator pinged softly as it reached the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a space unlike any other in the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with pale morning light. A long stretch of minimalist furniture, shelves lined with legal books in leather bindings. And in the far corner, behind a dark walnut desk, Ethan Green stood with his back to her. He didn't turn immediately, just kept looking out across the snow-covered skyline as if something out there demanded his full attention. "Come in," he said finally, without looking. Claire stepped forward, her pulse quickening. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Green." He turned then, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. "Yes. Sit, please." She sat gingerly, folding her hands in her lap. The silence stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. "I won't keep you long," he said. "I understand you have responsibilities outside of work." Claire nodded. "Yes, sir." "My son, he's 9. He has medical, I know." Ethan interrupted gently. "I asked HR to pull your file. I hope you don't mind." Claire blinked. "No, it's fine." There was another pause, then he continued. "I'd like to offer you a different position, temporary for now, but with better hours, better pay, and benefits." Claire's breath caught. "What kind of position?" "My personal assistant," Ethan said simply. "Mine is on medical leave for the next 6 to 8 weeks. I need someone detail-oriented, discreet, and dependable. I think you fit that description." Claire stared at him. Her mind raced. Why me? She wanted to ask, but didn't. Instead, she said quietly, "I don't have experience with executive support. Not at that level." "I know," he replied, "but you've handled client files, court schedules, and department transitions without error. You work hard. You don't gossip. And from what I've seen, you're calm under pressure." She gave a soft, uncertain laugh. "Passing out in the file room wasn't my best moment." His expression didn't change. "You came back. That counts for something." Claire looked down at her lap. The offer sounded like salvation, but it also felt like a risk. Could she handle the workload, the attention, the proximity, and the truth she hadn't told anyone yet? "I'd need some flexibility," she said carefully. "Josh has regular appointments, and I'd need to leave by 5:30 to pick him up." "Done." She blinked. "Also, I haven't caught up on bills since I've arranged for an advance," Ethan said, sitting on the edge of his desk now. "It'll be deposited today, just enough to get you back on your feet." Her throat tightened. This man, this sharply dressed, quietly intimidating figure, was doing more for her in 5 minutes than anyone had done in 5 years. And yet, she couldn't understand why. "May I ask?" she began. "Why me?" Really, Ethan's gaze didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted just slightly. "I believe in giving people chances when they need them most," he said, "and I think you're someone who doesn't ask for help, even when you should." Claire nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She felt exposed, seen in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. "I'll try not to disappoint you," she said finally. "I don't expect perfection," he replied, "just honesty." She stood, unsure whether to extend a hand or simply leave. Instead, she offered a small, earnest smile. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan didn't smile back, but his eyes softened, just a little. As she turned to leave, the faintest sound of city traffic hummed beyond the windows. The snow had started falling again, light and slow like confetti drifting from a forgotten celebration. Claire stepped into the elevator, doors closing quietly behind her. Inside, She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Back in the office below, Maggie looked up as Claire returned to her desk. "Well," she asked, curious. Claire shook her head, as if still trying to process it herself. I just got promoted." Maggie raised a brow, but didn't press. Claire sat down, eyes unfocused for a moment. Above, on the 32nd floor, Ethan Green stood at his window, watching the street below. He couldn't explain why he'd offered what he did, couldn't fully articulate what stirred in him when he looked at Claire Bennett. All he knew was that something in her reminded him of a door he thought had long been closed, and maybe, just maybe, it had begun to open. Grief never leaves. It only waits behind doors we try not to open. Ethan Green had mastered the art of keeping those doors closed. He lived in a world of clean lines, sharp suits, and glass walls. No clutter, no noise, no messy emotions. His office, his apartment, even the playlists he listened to all curated for control. But lately, small cracks had started to form, and Claire Bennett was standing in the light, coming through them. It started with her voice, soft. Even when rushed, focused, even when frazzled, he had begun to notice the way she spoke to everyone with quiet respect, even when they didn't deserve it. She didn't posture, she didn't flatter, she simply showed up on time, under pressure, and holding herself together with the invisible thread only single mothers seem to know how to find. And then came the moment with her son. Ethan had returned from a strategy meeting to find Claire seated in the side conference room with a boy about 9 years old. The kid was pale, thin, clearly recovering from something. But his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Claire was explaining a contract clause in language the boy could understand, using Legos on the table to demonstrate negotiation. "You see," she said, gently moving the pieces, "if this builder takes too many bricks and gives nothing in return, the other builder can walk away. That's called breach." Josh giggled. "Then what? Do they go to Lego court?" "Something like that," she said with a smile. Ethan stood outside the door longer than he intended, watching, listening, feeling something shift inside him, a slow, stirring ache he hadn't felt in years. Not since Elena. Elena Green had been everything Ethan wasn't. Warm, restless, full of faith in strangers. She was the kind of woman who brought soup to sick neighbors and wrote thank you notes on handmade cards. A social worker with a bleeding heart and a laugh that filled every corner of their loft. They'd been married just over a year when she told him she was pregnant. He remembered the moment in perfect detail. She'd danced into the kitchen with bare feet, holding the test like a miracle. She was glowing, humming some old Motown song, and he, despite his usual composure, had dropped the coffee mug in his hand. They cried, they planned, they picked names, and then she got sick, leukemia, the aggressive kind. By the time they caught it, she was already too weak for treatment. The doctors advised terminating the pregnancy, but Elena refused. "This baby is ours," she whispered to Ethan in the dark. "Even if we don't get forever, we get now." She passed away in February, wrapped in blankets, her fingers curled around Ethan's. Their daughter never made it to her first breath. He never spoke the name again. Hope. Now. Years later. Something in Claire's voice echoed Elena's strength. Not in tone, but in texture. The raw, quiet resilience. The kind that doesn't ask to be noticed, but stays with you once it is. That week, Ethan started asking small questions. Not intrusive, just enough to open a window. "How's your son feeling today?" "Did you manage to get the prescription filled?" Claire answered, cautiously at first. She didn't complain, but she didn't sugarcoat either. "He has good days and tired ones," she said. "It's a balancing act keeping his diet right, tracking symptoms. School's been kind, but kids don't always know how to be gentle." Ethan nodded. "Kids rarely do." He asked about the father, gently. Claire's eyes flickered, then looked away. "Not involved," she said simply. The answer carried no bitterness, just a resignation Ethan recognized. She didn't mention the pregnancy, and he didn't ask. The test remained in his drawer, untouched since the night he brought it home, still wrapped in tissue paper, still whispering questions he wasn't ready to voice. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Ethan sat alone reviewing quarterly reports. A name caught his eye, Claire Bennett, a routine background update, probably triggered by the HR system. He clicked the file, and there it was again, the letter. He hadn't meant to read it a second time, but he did. Claire Bennett is one of the most gifted students I've taught in my 22 years. She brings both logic and empathy to every case. She will not only make a fine lawyer, she will be a force for good in the profession. Prof. Alan Wexler, University of Minnesota Law, attached were transcripts, law school, top 10% of her class, moot court accolades, then a blank, a pause in her timeline. That blank was now sitting one floor below, sorting his emails, scheduling his meetings, and quietly carrying the weight of a life interrupted. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. "What happened to you?" "Claire," he murmured, not out of pity, not curiosity, but out of a growing sense that this woman wasn't just a name in payroll. She was a story only half told. The next morning, Minneapolis was blanketed in snow again, the kind that muffled sound and made the city feel softer, quieter, like even time was willing to pause. Claire arrived early, her coat dusted with frost, cheeks pink from the wind. She set her bag down, brewed a cup of tea, and went straight to work, eyes focused, motions precise. Ethan watched her from the hallway. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, but he felt something stir deep in his chest, a thought, a pull, a question, not about business, not about duty, but about whether doors once closed could ever truly stay shut. When someone like Claire Bennett stood quietly on the other side, truth has a way of finding the surface, no matter how deep we bury it. The ballroom glittered in soft gold and silver light, chandeliers casting elegant patterns across the marble floor. Laughter echoed lightly, music drifted in the background, and glasses clinked with the ease of people unburdened. Claire stood near the back, dressed in a navy dress she'd borrowed from Maggie, her shoes pinched, and she hadn't eaten much again, but her makeup held, and she'd remembered to smile. This was the annual charity gala for Green and McAllister, a benefit for underfunded family law clinics across the Midwest. Ethan had insisted she attend, even cleared her schedule to make it possible. "You're part of the firm now," he'd said, his tone final. She hadn't expected to enjoy it, and truthfully, she didn't. It wasn't her world, never had been. The polished lawyers, the soft designer perfume, the low hum of expensive confidence, it all felt like a dream she didn't belong in. But she played her part, nodded when spoken to, thanked donors, even made conversation, until she felt it, a flutter, then a firm push low beneath her ribs. She froze mid-sentence, her hand instinctively flying to her belly. Another small kick, stronger this time. Her baby. The moment hit like a wave. She was no longer just pregnant. This child was real, moving, alive, here, and for the first time, her body didn't just carry it, it felt it. The gala blurred around her. The light seemed too bright, the noise too sharp. She murmured an excuse to the woman beside her and slipped from the room. She found a quiet guest lounge down the hallway, dimly lit, with plush chairs and a fireplace that flickered gently. The silence pressed in like a warm blanket. She sat down slowly, hands cradling her stomach, and cried. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying, but the quiet sobs that come from holding everything in for far too long. All the fear, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the endless calculations about rent, school, prescriptions, the nights pretending to Josh that she wasn't scared, the mornings looking in the mirror, trying to believe she could do this again. Alone. She covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking. Behind her, the door clicked open. Footsteps, soft, careful. She didn't have to turn around. "Ethan, I'm sorry," she choked out, not looking at him. "I'll be fine. Just give me a minute." He didn't speak at first. Then quietly, "Claire." She wiped her face roughly. Stood too quickly? I'll go back out. I know how this looks. I shouldn't have left the room. You don't have to explain. Yes. I do, she said, voice trembling now. I've been hiding something. I wasn't trying to lie. I just didn't know how. She met his eyes finally. I'm pregnant. There. The truth. Stripped of pretense. Ethan didn't flinch, but he didn't move either. She swallowed hard. I found out a few weeks ago. I was going to wait until the contract ended to say anything. I just needed the job, the paycheck, silence. The father isn't in the picture. She continued. He left when I told him. Blocked my number. I haven't seen him since. Ethan's eyes were unreadable. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how fragile she felt under the weight of his silence. I know what this means, she said, voice cracking. I know what people think when they see a woman like me. Pregnant, single, working a temporary job. I've heard it all before. Tears slipped again. Fast now. But please, let me stay. Just until I can get on my feet. I'll work twice as hard. I won't miss a deadline. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I just need to feed 2 kids now. For a long moment, the room held its breath. Ethan's expression didn't soften. If anything, it closed just a little. He stepped back, nodded once, and turned toward the door. He didn't say a word. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Claire stood alone in the quiet room, staring at the space where he'd just been. Her hands slid down to her belly again, the memory of the kick still fresh beneath her skin. This is it, she thought, her chest tightening. It's over. What if the worst day of your life became the beginning of everything good? Claire stood in front of the elevator, staring at her reflection in the golden doors. She had barely slept. Her eyes were puffy, and her chest still carried the tightness from the night before the words she'd said, the tears she couldn't stop, and the way Ethan had walked away in silence. She told herself not to expect anything. She had survived worse. She'd learned not to hold her breath for second chances. Still, the knot in her stomach told a different story. The elevator chimed. She stepped in. As the floors ticked upward, she gripped the strap of her bag tighter. She had packed everything: her coffee mug, her folder, even a small potted plant Maggie had given her, just in case today would be her last. When the doors slid open, Claire stepped onto the executive floor. The lights were brighter than she remembered, or maybe she just hadn't noticed before. And then she froze. There, in the hallway outside Ethan's office, stood a brand new desk. It hadn't been there yesterday. Sleek, polished, with fresh stationery, a leather-bound planner, and a ceramic mug with a gold rim. But what caught her breath was the nameplate: Claire Bennett, Assistant Director, Green Hope Project. Her heart stilled. She blinked once, then again, but the name didn't change. Her hand reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing over the engraved letters. They were solid, real. Before she could gather a coherent thought, she heard his voice. You're early. She turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, holding a second cup of coffee. His tie was loosened slightly, and for the first time, there was something different in his expression, not guarded or stern, but open, human. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. He handed her the coffee. Come in. I'd like to talk. His office was warm, lit by the soft glow of a side lamp, and the fireplace beneath the bookshelves. The snow outside cast a muted blue against the windows, making everything feel quiet, like the world had paused. Claire sat on the edge of the chair across from his desk, coffee untouched in her hands. I imagine you didn't sleep much last night, Ethan said. She shook her head, still wary. I thought I'd be let go. You weren't wrong to think that, he said gently. The firm has policies, procedures, boundaries. She nodded, her eyes dropping. But sometimes, he continued, policy needs to make room for people. Claire looked up, unsure how to read him. I left last night, Ethan said, because I needed to think. Not about whether to fire you, but about whether I was ready to open a door I've kept shut for too long. She tilted her head slightly. My wife, Elena, he began, voice quieter now. Always dreamed of starting a nonprofit. Something that offered legal and emotional support to single mothers. She wanted to help women who fell through the cracks. He paused. The air between them softened. She called it the Green Hope Project. She had it written on sticky notes, old journals everywhere. I used to tease her for it. Claire gave a faint, tearful smile. I shelved the idea after she passed, Ethan continued. Until last night, when I realized the very person she would have built it for was standing in front of me. Claire sat still. The weight of his words settled slowly. I want you to lead it, he said. Her eyes widened. Me, yes, with full authority. We'll start small legal resources, counseling referrals, housing support. But this is your project, your voice. You know this life in a way no resume ever could. She stared down at the coffee cup in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I don't have a degree, she whispered. I never even finished school. You have lived experience, and instinct, and strength. Ethan leaned forward. I trust you. Claire, those words hit harder than she expected. Trust. She had earned many things in life: criticism, judgment, survival, but rarely trust, especially from men like him. You're not doing this out of pity, she asked carefully. No, he said firmly. I'm doing this because I believe in you, and because I believe Elena would have, too. Silence hung between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It felt like something clearing, healing. He stood and walked toward the door. Come see your desk. They stepped into the hallway. Claire ran her hand along the surface of the desk, smooth, new, still smelling faintly of varnish. The drawers slid open easily. Inside was a planner already marked with a meeting schedule, a list of local organizations Ethan had already contacted, a note in his handwriting. Every movement starts with one woman deciding she matters. She touched the nameplate again. Claire Bennett. Her name, on a door, on a future, not hidden, not temporary, not borrowed, but hers. For the first time in years, something inside her loosened. She felt seen, and for the first time in even longer, she believed it was okay to be seen. Some people get second chances. Others build them from the ground up. The Green Hope Project opened its doors on a rainy Thursday morning. No ribbon cutting, no press release, just a warm room filled with mismatched chairs, coffee brewing in the corner, and a stack of forms waiting for signatures. But within hours, the space came alive with laughter, with tears, with women who hadn't had a place to be heard in a very long time. Claire stood near the doorway, clipboard in hand, watching it unfold. A young mother with a toddler on her hip asked about job training. Another asked if someone could help her understand a custody order. A third sat quietly in the corner, just holding a cup of tea. There was no glamour here, but there was dignity and hope. By the end of the month, Green Hope had assisted 32 women, each one with a story, some heartbreaking, some triumphant, most somewhere in between. Claire worked 12-hour days but didn't feel tired. Not the kind of tired that drained her. This was different. This was the kind of tired that made sleep feel earned. And outside the office, her world was changing too. She and Josh had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment near the river. Nothing fancy, but clean, quiet, and warm. The windows caught the afternoon sun. The floors didn't creak, and for the first time, Josh had a room that was truly his. His health had improved with a new medication plan, thanks to the insurance Green and McAllister now provided. His cheeks were rosier, his laugh louder. He slept through the night. Claire began to breathe again. One Friday evening, the doorbell rang just after 7. Josh opened the door before Claire could stop him. Mr. Green. Ethan stood in the hallway, dressed down for once in jeans and a navy sweater, holding a large teddy bear with a red ribbon. "For you," he said, handing it to Josh. "He doesn't have a name yet, though." Josh hugged the bear tightly. "I'll think of something." Claire appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked surprised, but not uncomfortable. "I hope this isn't too late," Ethan said. "I was in the area." She smiled softly. "Come in." They ate dinner together, leftover lasagna, garlic bread, and store-bought salad. Josh insisted on showing Ethan his space-themed Lego collection. Ethan listened attentively, asked questions, and even helped rebuild a damaged spaceship. Later, after Josh went to bed, they sat in the living room. A soft jazz record played in the background. The lights were low. A candle flickered near the window. Claire held a warm mug of chamomile tea between her palms. "You're good with him," she said quietly. Ethan leaned back slightly. "I like kids. I thought I'd have one by now." Claire didn't press, but the way she looked at him said she remembered what he'd shared. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then, gently, Ethan said, "I've been thinking about what you said that night about the pregnancy." Claire's body stiffened, just slightly. He noticed and softened his voice. "I just want you to know, it doesn't change anything." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, her guard slipped. "I'm still figuring it out," she said, "still trying to make peace with it. It wasn't supposed to happen. I thought I was done starting over." He nodded. "I understand. I'm not ready for anything complicated," she continued. "I'm still carrying someone else's child. That doesn't go away just because things are good now." There was a long pause. Ethan didn't move closer. He didn't make a speech, but he also didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to be ready," he said quietly. "I'm just here. That's all." His words weren't grand, but they were steady, like stone beneath her feet. Claire looked down, blinking fast. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she whispered, "especially not you." "You won't," he replied. "I promise." She nodded slowly, and then the smallest of smiles. Later that night, after Ethan left and the apartment had quieted again, Claire stood by Josh's door, watching him sleep. His new bear lay beside him, one arm tucked under his chin. Claire's hands rested on her belly. The baby kicked once, gently. She exhaled. The past hadn't disappeared. The pain hadn't magically resolved. But something new was forming. Not certainty, not security, but something like safe. Some stories are meant to be told. Others must be lived before they're shared. The hall was filled to the edges. Rows of folding chairs lined the newly polished floor. Simple centerpieces made from donated flowers stood on each table. There was no press, no cameras, just real people, donors, volunteers, community leaders, and women whose lives had already begun to change through the work of Green Hope. Claire stood backstage, one hand resting on her belly. Her dress was soft and simple, just enough to accommodate the curve that had grown more prominent in recent weeks. She wore her hair tucked back behind one ear, her shoes flat, her palms slightly damp. On the other side of the curtain, someone adjusted the microphone. She could hear Maggie joking with the crowd. Laughter trickled through, easy and warm. Josh sat somewhere in the front row, between Maggie and Miss Alvarez, one of the first women the center had helped. He wore a button-down shirt he picked out himself and kept practicing how to clap at the right time. And Ethan. He was seated front and center, not in a suit today, but in a dark gray sweater and blazer, no tie. His posture relaxed, but his eyes focused, on the stage, on her. Claire closed her eyes and breathed in slowly. Then she stepped out. The applause was kind, encouraging. She took the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out over the crowd. Dozens of faces, some familiar, some brand new, all listening. 6 months ago, she began. I was working a temp job. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I passed out in a file room because I was trying to stretch one paycheck across too many needs. A few murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. I was hiding a pregnancy, raising a child with a chronic illness, alone, afraid, and tired in a way I didn't know how to explain. She paused, not for effect, but because the memory still carried weight. And then something unexpected happened. I got seen. Her eyes found Ethan's. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The warmth in his expression said everything. A man I barely knew noticed that I was drowning and didn't look away. He gave me work, but more than that, he gave me space to rise. She scanned the room. I know many of you have heard my story in parts, through paperwork, through office rumors, maybe in passing from someone else. But I want to tell it in full because I think someone out there needs to hear it. Claire's voice stayed steady. I didn't grow up dreaming I'd become a case study in survival. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to help people. I didn't imagine dropping out of school, losing insurance, fighting through courtrooms just to keep my child safe. A hush had fallen over the room. But this is the truth, she said gently. Sometimes life tears us down in ways that feel personal. But they're not punishments. They're invitations to build differently, to choose softness in the face of hard things, to be honest about how heavy survival is. Her hand drifted briefly toward her belly. I used to believe I had to earn the right to be seen, that I had to do everything right, ask for nothing, apologize for needing help. But Green Hope changed that. She took a breath. This isn't just a center. It's not just a program. It's a mirror for every woman who forgot what she looks like when she stands tall. From the crowd, a few sniffles, a tissue passed from one woman to another. Claire continued, we've helped over 80 women in our pilot phase. That's 80 children who saw their mothers breathe easier. That's 80 stories beginning again, and we are just getting started. The room swelled with quiet pride. Then she said the words she had saved for last. My daughter is due in a few weeks. I didn't plan for her. I wasn't ready. But she's here anyway. Showing up, kicking strong, reminding me every day that life continues. Claire smiled, her voice softer now. I've decided to name her Hope, because that's what she brought me back. The applause didn't explode. It rose, like a tide, gentle but unrelenting, a standing wave of affirmation. Claire stepped back from the podium, tears welling but not falling. And in that moment, Ethan stood. He walked to the edge of the stage, no speech, no gesture, just a single hand, extended upward. Claire reached for it, their fingers locked. The room, still clapping, seemed to disappear behind a haze of warmth and quiet awe. And Claire, standing there, didn't feel afraid anymore. Not of judgment, not of failure, not of love. She had walked through fire, and on the other side was light. There are moments when life hands you more than you ever dreamed after it's taken everything you had. The nursery was quiet, lit only by the soft amber glow of a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. A mobile spun gently above the crib, casting tiny shadows across the wall. The room smelled faintly of lavender and clean cotton. Claire stood at the edge of the crib, rocking slowly side to side. In her arms was the smallest soul she'd ever held, Hope Elena Bennett. 6 pounds, 11 ounces, a full head of dark hair, quiet eyes that seemed to understand far more than they should. She'd come into the world on a snowy April morning early, but healthy. And from the moment Claire laid eyes on her daughter, she knew this child wasn't just a continuation of her life. She was a new beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of feedings, diapers, and gentle lullabies at 2A. But they weren't lonely. Josh had taken to Big Brotherhood, like he was born for it, bringing pacifiers like treasure, reading bedtime stories in his serious, 9-year-old voice, and watching over Hope with a gentle protectiveness that melted Claire's heart. And Ethan. He came by most evenings, never unannounced, always with something in hand, groceries, soup, soft blankets, sometimes flowers that he pretended were just for the table. He stayed for dinner, helped with dishes, sat cross-legged on the floor while Josh explained the science behind rocket propulsion, Sometimes he rocked Hope to sleep with surprising ease. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, just presence, steady, quiet, undemanding. One Thursday night, after Claire had put Hope down, she found Ethan sitting on the couch, flipping through an old photo album Josh had left out. The pictures were from Claire's law school days, snapshots of the life she once thought she'd live. "I didn't know you made it this far," he said, tapping a photo of her standing in front of a university banner. "I almost graduated," she replied, settling beside him. Then life changed course. He nodded, understanding without needing the details. There was a silence between them, not heavy, not awkward, just full. And then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key. He placed it in her palm, carefully, deliberately. Claire looked down at it, then back up at him. "It's not a proposal," he said gently. "It's a door." She waited. "To the house Elena and I bought together. I haven't lived there since she passed. Couldn't. It held too many ghosts. But lately," his voice softened, "it's been feeling more like an invitation." Claire said nothing. "I've had it cleaned up, painted. There's a nursery already, a garden in the back where Josh can build whatever he wants, and a kitchen you'd probably hate less than this one." A smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I'm not asking for forever," he said, "or for promises you're not ready to give." He looked her in the eyes. "I'm just asking if you'd want to start again. Not alone." Claire stared at the key. It was small, ordinary, but it felt heavier than any gift she'd ever received. Not because of what it opened, but because of what it meant. Trust, respect, a willingness to build something new without erasing what came before. She thought about everything they had walked through together and apart. The collapse, the silence, the shame, the soft, slow reawakening of something she thought she'd buried long ago, the right to want more. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to explain her past, because he already knew. She didn't need to protect her pain, because he had protected it for her. She didn't need to be strong, because now, she wasn't alone. Claire reached across the cushion and took Ethan's hand, not urgently, not dramatically, but with the quiet, steady grip of someone ready to walk, not run into the future. No vows, no grand declarations, just breath and being. She closed her fingers around the key. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. Ethan's thumb brushed across the back of her hand. "Neither do I." And that was enough. Weeks passed, spring arrived, the snow melted, hope grew stronger. Claire returned part-time to Green Hope. The center expanded into a second building. Maggie got promoted. Josh entered a local science fair with a homemade wind-powered generator. Life wasn't perfect. Bills still came. Diapers still ran out. Claire still cried some nights when the past crept in through dreams. But she was no longer surviving. She was living. On a sunny morning in May, Claire walked through the old wooden door of Ethan's house with Josh holding one hand and Hope cradled against her chest. The garden outside had begun to bloom wildflowers, mostly untamed, vibrant. Josh ran ahead, laughing. Ethan waited on the porch steps, coffee in hand, eyes full of something that looked very close to peace. Claire stepped onto the porch, looked out across the yard, then down at the baby in her arms. Hope stirred, then smiled in her sleep. Claire smiled back, not because everything was certain, but because everything was finally hers. Sometimes, the strongest people are not the ones who win the battles out loud, but the ones who endure in silence, who show up every day for their children, for their loved ones, even when their hearts are breaking. Claire's journey reminds us that life has a way of bending us without warning. Loss, loneliness, financial struggle. These can make us feel invisible, but even in our most fragile moments, grace can find us, sometimes through unexpected people, sometimes through quiet opportunities. Ethan's story teaches us that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means choosing to keep living honoring what was, while gently opening the door to what could still be, together. Their story is a reminder that dignity is not given by the world, it's claimed through resilience. That hope is not a luxury. It's a choice we make when we refuse to give up. And love, real love, often begins not with passion, but with presence, with staying, listening, and building something new, even when we're still carrying the weight of what's been lost. So, if you're in a hard season, hold on. You're not finished yet. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of what truly matters. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.